Well, welcome to the High Vibration Living podcast, KJ.
Hi, Whitney. Thank you for having me.
This is my pleasure. I really want to learn more about like your astrology style and how you figured out your niche within the astrology zone, like what really lights you up and what you like sharing and teaching your clients and your community.
When I started studying astrology probably 12 years ago. It's been a really long time at this point.
Yeah.
And what I started to notice was everything was very airy, up in the ether. And a lot of people in my personal life that I would speak to when I was learning about this stuff were just very confused and sort of like, you're not speaking my language, you're speaking something else. And so I felt like there was a gap in bridging it towards people who maybe had never experienced all of the lingo that comes with the spiritual awakening and the community that you find through that process, and the people who are very seasoned. Once you become an astrologer and once you learn all of the words, it's like you are speaking another language. And I was raised by an elementary school teacher, and I was just instilled this idea of like, break it down, make it simple. And that has always been my approach with astrology. Is one time someone told me, I love astrology, but it's just like this idea and I don't know what to do with it. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. We need to change that.
Yeah.
We need to make this actionable in ways that everyone can understand and sprinkle into their day-to-day life in large heaps or little dustings. It's totally customizable, but it's an ancient tool that's been around for 12,000 years, and our ancestors used this as a calendar. And if we are on a journey of getting back to nature in any kind of way, even if you live in a big city, this is one of the best ways to do that, knowing astrology.
So glad you brought that up. So I want to say 11 years ago, I traveled to Cuba and I got to go to this tiny little farm outside of Havana. And they grew all the vegetables for the town. This tiny little town, this one farmer, he grew majority of the vegetables for everyone and also provided it for this one restaurant that was in the town. And you guys can look up the town. It's the town where Hemingway lived. And it was the best the best meal I had in Cuba. And when we were talking to him, we had a translator from the restaurant. He does everything by astrology. He
Wow.
plants all of his fruits and vegetables, does his harvest, everything by the moon and the astrology in these old books he has. And this was, 2015, that I was meeting with this farmer. So it's so interesting that this is information that people have used in so many different ways in their
Mhm.
life for forever. And it's like we're revisiting it again and then figuring out ways to align it for how we live now.
Yeah, exactly. Because most of us aren't going to go be a homesteader or have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always living in high rises in a city without a garden. And so I'm like, how am I connected to nature even when I can't see the stars? And knowing the patterns and cycles of astrology is the most accessible way to do that, I feel, for a lot of people.
I think as we move into 2025, more and more people are going to become more sensitive. So I think they're going to be more, they're going to understand the ebbs and flows in their bodies, the ebbs and flows in their energy levels,
Yeah.
why they're super motivated some days and other days they need a rest. I think people are going to feel more. And I think they're going to need the tool of astrology to understand why they're fluctuating in that way. And it's easier when you can see the ocean tides, If you're in
Yeah.
a place where you can see the tides every day, you see how the moon is interacting with nature. But if you're in a city and you're just going, 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 and you aren't looking up at the night sky, you aren't paying attention, you won't understand why you're having those fluctuations in life, and you'll get frustrated and you'll think it's the food, you'll think
Yeah.
it's your diet, you'll think it's how you've been expending your energy, you think you need supplements, a pill. And so I want people to start to better understand how astrology is impacting them so they can use it as a tool to feel better in their body and just enjoy their life.
I totally agree with you. Astrology represents, when you look at your birth chart, for example, everyone has a birth chart. A lot of people think, oh, this is like a diagram of the soul. And I always say, well, the mind, body, spirit are connected. So it's also a diagram of your body energy and your aura. And it relates to, there's a whole branch of medical astrology. It connects
Yeah,
to every piece of us, down to our fashion and our voice and our sense of expression.
that is so beautiful. It's a diagram of our soul. That's just really pretty because I really enjoy the natal chart. And when we were chatting earlier, I mentioned Lavendar, and Lavendar, the astrologer I know who's in her 80s now, she's always reminding me that if you feel lost, just take your natal chart, print it out, put it up on your mirror in your bathroom, put it on your
Yeah.
refrigerator, put it in a place where you see it every day. You might not understand it, but your soul and your blood and something within you understands that chart, and it'll help guide you again. It's like a map. When we're kids, someone hands us a map. We might not know how to read it, but ultimately we'll pick it up, and something within us picks up what's in that chart and helps us better interpret it.
Right. It's like our potential. And as a child, you express your moon sign usually as a
Yeah.
child, and then as life goes on, you sort of evolve and these different parts of you wake up. It's really cool to look at a baby's birth chart and say, "Wow, there's so much life here to live." And as time goes on, you sort of evolve into all these different pieces. Like I'll talk to someone who's maybe in their early 20s and like, "Oh, I don't really feel like that part of my chart." I'm like, "Just wait.
Wow.
Just wait.
I
It's going to
didn't
come
know
online."
that. So, as a kid, you're more of your moon sign. When do
Yeah.
you grow into your sun sign? And when do you tell me about the layers of how you grow?
I perceive it as, and I actually learned this recently, that true postpartum ends when the child is about 7 years old. And that actually coincides with when the child sort of separates from parents and the spirit of parents to come out on their own. And that's when they start journeying towards their sun sign. So at age 7, you have your first Saturn square. That's your dose of reality. And you're like, okay, things happen. There's things like death. There's things like hardship. I am a human. I'm my own person. Let's start creating. And so around puberty age, when you're like, okay, I want to be my own person. I don't want to be associated with my parents. And you're kind of embarrassed and you're like weird in your skin. That's when we start developing into the sun and creating that sense of identity. And then usually as we get into early 20s, we start to explore and lean into the rising sign, but I don't think it becomes fully developed until around your Saturn return at around 28 to 30. Those are just the big three placements.
Wow. I am 43, and that is spot on.
Oh,
Spot
really?
on for my life trajectory, especially age 7 and all the changes. 7 was a very significant age in my life, major changes. So that's so nice to know. I
Yeah,
wish, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot. It's like, I wish I would have just been taught this a little bit as a kid, just little
yeah,
sprinklings here and there. I wish as a child I could have seen my astrological chart just better. It's like I just wish I could have been given my little map, even if I didn't know how to interpret it. It would have been nice. But at
yeah,
least
I
I'm
hear
learning
you.
now, and hopefully I can support other kids, in the future. And that's kind of what I want to learn more about with astrology, is like, how can I use it as my map to better guide myself and my businesses through life? So better be able to read when it's time for me to slow down and rest and take a
Hmm.
vacation, know when to amp up and spend more time focused on work, know when to focus more on my social life. Are those things that you can find in someone's chart for the year ahead? Or is it something that is just part of that happens every year for us?
Oh, it's definitely changing year by
Okay,
year. There are some
that's
factors,
okay.
we can think of it, the wheel of the zodiac as the seasons. There's 4 seasons, but there's actually 12 seasons because there's 12 signs of the zodiac. And if you take each of the 4 seasons and you break them down into 30-day cycles, that's the 12 signs. And that's something that you can follow year by year. I always say, once we plunge into Libra and Scorpio, which is the fall season in the Northern Hemisphere, that's a time where you start to move into less exertion, more rest,
I agree.
preparing for periods of darkness, metaphorically and literally.
Yeah.
So that's something you can use every year. But I would say these slowdown periods, I always follow the retrogrades, which are the planetary illusion from the perspective of Earth that the planet is moving backwards. Our ancestors have been using this for centuries, thousands of years, to plan these times of pullback and
Yeah.
less exertion. So I use those and they change every single year. That's why it's important to have a little bit of baseline astro knowledge and a good astrology calendar, all those things to help track when those are. So you can say, okay, I'm going to prepare all of these things for my business in the 3 months leading up to a retrograde so that I can use that retrograde as a lull to kind of pull back and reset before the next push.
And you nailed it. November 25th, we're going into Mercury in retrograde. So essentially it's already started and we're going to be there through about mid-December, right? So it's really come Thanksgiving and the holiday season. It truly is the time to rest and slow down and spend time with family and friends or just yourselves and work inward.
I've been saying this is the winter of all winters because we have Mars retrograde, and that only happens every 2 years, and it's happening December 6th through February 23rd. That's like most of the winter. Mars retrograde, you have to think about the energy of the planet. And when it's retrograde, I always say it's like out of office. So Mars being out of office is like your motivation, your drive, your libido, your vitality, all of these Mars things that are usually on and firing and helping you hustle, especially in business and our culture, is tempered. And it can really stifle that.
It hasn't even started yet, but I feel it. Like I've never felt more of a slowdown than I feel right now. And this year, and I see it on everyone's face, and I see it everywhere I go. I see it when I talk to my clients. I see it when I talk to the chefs that work with me. Everyone's ready for a slowdown, a hibernation.
Yeah, it's going to get a little stronger. So January is a really good time to plan that vacation, to escape the winter and just rest somewhere if you have the ability to do so. Even just a weekend getaway, friends or families, like staycation, just to get out of your routine and take a trip. It's a good winter to do that and to not plan to launch anything big that requires a lot of energy output.
Perfect. So it's our time to plan, to rest, to read, to work on ourselves, to prepare for our beautiful year ahead. I love this. I know I find this helpful. The part of astrology that I find helpful is, I'm a Gemini, right? So I'm always in my head and I like to keep going. And what astrology provides me is the opportunity to slow down and not feel guilty, to settle into how I'm feeling. Yeah. So it's that feeling where it's like, you need to slow down, you need to rest. Like you just don't have the drive and energy that you did and you don't know why. And so your nature is just to keep pushing through. And then when you look at the astrology and it says, no, really, this is the time for rest. You're like, oh, okay. Nature and the stars says I can. So I guess I will. And I find it really helpful. Yeah.
It's hard to sort of decondition to that because if you ask anyone, there's this idea of like, you work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and you are supposed to be on every day of the year, except for a couple sprinkled in holidays, but you should probably still keep your phone on you just in case, like that's this sort of Americanized idea of the Western world and the work world. And I think astrology is going to really help us deprogram from that, especially as this new era we're moving into. We just moved into Pluto in Aquarius for the next 18 years. So it really is the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. And astrology is ruled by Aquarius. So I think this will be a call for all of us to lean back into these more natural cycles of time than artificial cycles of time.
So what's some advice that you can give for us so we aren't sad that it's an end of an era, that we aren't nostalgic for the way things used to be? What are some insights or predictions that you have for how good it can get, how amazing the next 18 years can be, how we're going to be evolving to a different way of life?
I think the only constant is change. And when we look up at the stars and planets, we see that they're always moving. There really is no stagnant energy there. And if we mirror that, we know that there's always a new cycle coming. Pluto always shows us the dark side of that sign when it first moves into it. So there is sort of this rhetoric happening that like, oh, we're in the age of Aquarius. Everything's going to be community. It's going to be great. And like, eventually, but we have to clear out the cesspool of how we got to the lack of, and we have to explore, the dark sides of technology or science and advancements and some of these things that are more Aquarian in nature, just like we did when Pluto moved into Capricorn. This is something that has happened since the dawn of time. So the beginning of the cycles where we really examine and then we put on our headlamps and say, okay, let's get to work. Let's start going through all of this so that we can make progress and evolve. Because Pluto's whole function is about evolution, making it better. So towards the middle to end of this cycle, I think we will see less individualism, more community. I think we'll see helpful advancements in technology. I'm actually thinking people will start to decrease the amount of time they spend on social media and focus more on experiences in person. Not now, but I think there will be maybe even new technology that helps that, because I think our system of social media now was designed for technology and communication and to bring closeness, but it's brought a lot more distance and comparison. So I'm thinking that the next forms of that will be more in alignment with creating a sense of unity, but it's just going to take some time.
I love
I
that.
agree with you
Well,
too that we're
let's
going to
talk
start
about,
getting more sensitive.
yeah, I really think, obviously, I think people who work in this health, wellness, astrology, spirituality field are sensitive. That's how we heard our calling to move into this space before it was cool, before it was accepted, right? We are definitely like the outliers, or 5 or 10 years ahead of the collective. But I think the collective, always catches up. And so I think that's what we're moving into. And everyone's going to become a little more sensitive, aware. Their consciousness is going to be evolving, and they're going to be curious about the things that were a little more woo-woo
Yeah.
5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But it's all for the betterment of their life and their health, and guiding them to, I just find these all as tools for our tool belt to make the path just a little bit lighter and easier on our road to personal development and evolution.
Right. They're tools. You said it exactly. It's funny you mentioned that. There's a little anecdotal evidence of that. I have an allergy doctor, and he's just the sweetest. And he was like, in the last 10 years, he's like, I've never seen so many people become so sensitive. He's like, we are so sensitive. He's like, I've been doing this for 45 years. And he's like, we are so much more sensitive. And I was like, I have a theory.
Yeah.
And it really has a lot to do with, I think, there's a lot of factors there, but I think some of it has to do with just our bodies kind of opening up and becoming more sensitive energetically.
Yeah. And just the personal evolution that's happening to all the souls on the planet, which is a great thing because people are going to be more mindful of what they put in their body, what they put on their body, the bodies that they interact with. It will ultimately be a beautiful thing. The next few years, I think we'll still have a lot of people kind of hibernating as they get comfortable with all their feelings. And then we'll get to a place where, people are social again, and we're all connecting because people can better manage their energy and how they feel.
Yeah,
It's a long evolutionary cycle. Things don't happen and change overnight. It's
that's
a
true.
it's a much longer game plan.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to chat with you about, because as an astrologer, you talk about void of moon, and not a lot of astrologers talk about void of moon. I've only met 2 other astrologers that bring it up, and they've always told me to never sign a contract on void of moon, meaning if you're moving into a new apartment, don't let that be the day you sign the lease. If you are, paying any big bills, making any big business moves, just wait till the next day to sign that document. What do you know about void of moon, and what do you teach your clients about it?
Well, void of moon happens every 2.5 days. What happens is the moon is in a sign for 2.5 days. And when it's in that sign, it's going to be making aspects. I always say visualize this as laser beams coming from the moon. So the moon is like making different geometric angled laser beams at planets throughout its journey traveling through. And when it's done making those connections to other planets, I always say pretend it's wobbling on its side. It's like a ball that's just like you can't grab it. It's a bouncy ball that's going off the walls. Need to go grab this. That is kind of the energy of the void moon. It's when it's transitioning from one sign to another. It's still in the sign, but it hasn't yet moved in, and it's not connecting to any other planets to sort of anchor it. And my mentor always said, you don't want to do anything that you really want to stick. I still take calls during void moons. We have a really long void moon today. There's a void moon right now. I still take calls. I still take meetings because you have to do that. I'm not going to take a whole entire Friday off because it's a void moon. But I'm also not going to ship in a book proposal during that time, something that's a really long-term project. I'm not going to open a cart for a big launch during that. It's kind of like business as usual. I always say keep it predictable. Hardest thing I always deal with, and this is such a surface level privilege thing. But because it happens every 2 days or so, I always have a hard time figuring out dinner, like the end of the day. I'm like, oh, I'm just kind of exhausted. Like, there's just some scraps in the fridge. Is my restaurant open? Like, can I take out? And then it's usually just kind of this chaos of like me and my partner, like, what do you want? What do you want? And decision making can be difficult. So I always say try to use void moon periods and track them to stick to what's routine. So if my routine is a few calls a day, that's fine. I'm going to do those calls. But if it falls during dinner, I'll be like, yep, I'm going to go ahead and make a plan. I'm not going to make a fancy reservation for a place I really want to enjoy. I'm going to order my Thai from my favorite lady down the street. And that's my plan.
I like that. That's good advice. What apps do you like using for astrology?
Well, good question. My favorite one, and I do buy the add-ons, but once you buy them, you have them forever. It's not a subscription. It's called Astrofuture. And I just love the way that it's laid out. And it's really cool. You can put in a chart and then you can look at the bi-wheel. I'll show it to you like this. You can see 2 wheels, and then you can actually scan the dates, like move around these dates.
Yeah.
And watch the planets move. And I think that's super cool. So you can get a real visual for what it's doing.
I like that.
That's my favorite one. That's my number one.
Is that the one that you use to check moon void of course?
I don't have a good app for that, which is why I created my calendar, because I was like, there's a problem here. We need a good void calculator.
Yeah.
And there was no app. So what I use the Llewellyn Daily Planetary Guide, and I would recommend that to my clients. And they were like, this is all in symbols. This is in glyphs. I don't know how to read this. These are like Egyptian hieroglyphics. I have no idea what's going on. So there isn't one until I make one that I know of.
Yeah. Yeah. So with your app and it adds to your Google Calendar, it will list, I can open my Google Calendar and see every day coming up that's void of moon.
Yeah, you can see all the transits and the void of moon, and it gives you a little description of what to do with it during that time, how to use it. So it's not an app, it's just a Google Calendar integration. So you get the invite to your calendar and you plug it in and you can toggle it on and off because there's a lot of transits every day. So if you're like, wow, this is like really overwhelming my calendar, turn it off. And then if you're like, okay, I really just want to check the astrology, turn off everything else, turn it on, see what the transits are for the day. Another app that I like that's good for bigger transits is the Pattern. I really liked the old school version. There's a lot of complex things to it now, but things have to grow and the people who developed it deserve to get paid. But I think there's some really beautiful things. Some of the notifications that come through on the Pattern have changed my life. Like I've shared stories before about I was going through a really hard time, and then the moment I went to a Reiki healer and literally felt like I cleared something, I got a notification and it was like, you've completed a cycle. And I was like, oh, that's insane.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So the Pattern, Astrofuture, those are really the only apps that I use and
All right. I've seen you mention and talk about astrology like weather, that there's ebbs and flows to the astrological cycles, just like there's ebbs and flows with our weather and patterns.
Yeah.
How can people get insight into their own personal weather pattern? Do they need to find an astrologer that they work with and get a yearly rundown? Is using an app enough? How can people understand kind of the weather patterns that lie ahead for their year?
Well, I definitely think number one is the best option. It's super custom. Someone's going to look at your chart and say, this is the energy, this is what's coming through, and this is how it's probably going to react with you and your circumstances. I think the conversational piece of a reading is really important versus like getting a pre-recorded or report from someone, because being able to know the context of what they're going through, then I'm able to take the pieces together and say, okay, this is how this is going to play out, and here's what you should do to work with this. I do like the Pattern app for greater cycles of personal transits, because it'll say you're going through a period for like maybe the entire year, the next 12 months, and it's maybe a Pluto transit, and that's personalized. My almanac does not have the capability to do personal transits. That takes a lot of coding and a lot of information. I do think the Pattern does that really well. No offense to CoStar, but I always kind of discourage people from really relying on that, and more than just like, oh, this is kind of like a funny thing for the day. I always say use CoStar as if you would pull like an oracle card and just be like, huh, what's the vibe? Okay. Like, don't live your life by that, because they hire poets, not astrologers. So there's a different type of expertise you're getting. It's art. It is an art project.
Yeah, that's really great advice. You have to be mindful as well if you're just picking up a newspaper or a magazine, or looking at something on Instagram and seeing what the the astrology recommendation for your sun sign for that
Yeah.
week or that month. It's not customized to you. It's
Hmm.
not 100% for you.
That's such a good point. And your sun sign is one component out of a chart that has 9 different planets and several placements that are also getting, I like to call it, activated by transits. It's like if there's a wheel and there's a spotlight, if each of the planets are spotlights and they go around and they touch different parts of your chart, then that's like shining a spotlight on that right now of a specific energy quality based on the 2 planets that are interacting. So it might be really intense, heavy spotlight, or it might be like a lucky windfall or like a new lover. Like it could be, there could be so many flavors of it. And that's why knowing the planets is helpful. But those activations are super personal, and a horoscope isn't going to deliver that. It's going to be really high level. I used to write horoscopes for 2 years, daily
Oh, no way.
horoscopes. Yeah,
Where'd you
it's a
write
really
them?
hard job. I wrote them
Yeah.
for a company out of Israel, and then they took everything in house several years ago. And I wrote 2 million words for them. It was crazy. I wrote about 20,000 words a week. I developed
Wow.
almost like carpal tunnel. I had to go to a chiropractor to like get my hands realigned from writing. But I learned so much in the process because I was tracking transits and writing these transits out in horoscope form for love, money, and general day to day for every sign every day. So that's 36 horoscopes every day. It was a grind, but it was the best boot camp ever. I learned so much. But coming
Yeah.
from someone who has written a lot of horoscopes, like it's very difficult. It's very difficult to, even if you see the transit, be like, how can I make this apply to 1/12 of the population?
Yeah. And so what did you learn about, since you're a Gemini, a sun sign, what did you learn about how you relate simply to your sun sign?
When I look back, I'm like, every job I've ever had is so Gemini. Before I was an astrologer, which I got into by writing, I used to write Wikipedia articles for blue chip companies. And then before that, I would write donor campaigns for research companies. And so all of this was about like communications and writing and sharing
Hmm.
information. And with the research campaigns, I would like distill scientific data because that's what my degree's in. I have a health science degree. And so I would distill that and then write it into this emotional campaign to raise money for these scientific research centers. And to me, when I started to really dive into, I think we really live on autopilot with our sun signs a lot. A lot of people say they don't identify with it until we get into session and really break it down because the horoscopes, pop astrology really says like 3 keywords like, oh, you're a Virgo? Well, you're a perfectionist, you're organized, and really earthy and practical. And a lot of Virgos will be like, that's really annoying. Like, I want to know more about myself. And then you break it down, and there's so much more to every single sign other than these stereotypes. So I think for me, it was a reflection of like, what are all the ways that Gemini shows up? Gemini is extroverted and also socially anxious and also an overthinker and also fascinated and a sponge and wants to learn more. And I was like, all these things apply to me in some truth at some point in my journey. And it's kind of like you get to see the mosaic of Gemini of like, what are all the little pieces of Gemini and how does it make my picture? Whereas like your Gemini might look a little different, but it's still the same range of flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you described is definitely feelings and parts of me at different times in my life.
Yeah.
And I would say one thing that I find really interesting about our sun sign that I've just experienced is other people don't see that, right? Because that's
Yeah.
not the part of us that they see. So I really relate to being a Gemini. There are parts of that that people see, but there's a lot of parts that people don't see. And I find it just really interesting. So I love learning about, and I love helping other people learn about, their sun, moon, rising, like the different elements of them so they
Hmm.
can understand how they feel versus how they're being seen. I
Yeah.
think because it helps us in our insecurities.
What's your rising?
Uh,
Okay. You have a Taurus rising face. Your Taurus is probably how people experience you a lot. And my rising is Sagittarius. People are always like, of course you're traveling. And I'm like, I don't really travel that much anymore until now. And then it's like, yeah, of course I'm traveling. And then they experience me as like the kooky professor of astrology, which is very Sagittarius. And so, like, you're a chef, you're working with the sensuality of nature and foods. Like, that's a very Taurus thing to do.
Yeah,
And you have a
right.
very calming, sensual, like, peaceful energy, which is very Taurus. So almost everyone is going to experience you based on your rising sign, at least for the first part. And some people may not ever even experience your moon sign because that's kind of like this protected piece behind the scenes for your partner, your family, the more intimate sides of life.
Yeah, interesting. That's beautiful. And that's a great reminder to people. And then I guess we can reflect back on when we were 1 through 7, when we were more of our moon sign.
Yeah, yeah. I was a Cancer. I'm a Cancer moon, and I was so sensitive and emotional and overly compassionate. I would just like cry at everything. Everything was so big and so tender. And then that kind of went away. And I was like, I don't
Yeah.
really feel that much anymore. I have a really big heart, but it's like also there's like protection there. So definitely believe that you lean into your moon sign when you're a kiddo.
Yeah, I'm a Libra moon, so very balanced,
Yeah.
very Switzerland, like to keep things fair. Yeah, fair and balanced.
Did you have a lot of friends growing up? Like, were you kind of like friends with everybody or like social?
Yes, 1 through 7, I would say I was friends with everyone, but I was also very bullied. And
Oh,
people don't know that.
yeah.
People would say I was probably very popular, but what
Mhm.
was really happening is I was constantly managing being treated in a variety of different ways.
Oh, that's hard.
And then not having to just show up every day with a smile on my face
Hmm.
and kind of, yeah, it was
Keep the
very,
peace. Yeah,
yeah,
very
very,
Libra.
yeah. So I allowed people to show up as ugly as they did growing up, and never needed to confront them because it's not worth it. They
Yeah,
know how they treated me, and they get to reflect on that as an adult.
I know the feeling. Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah, we just keep moving forward and enjoying our lives, and they will never get away from me.
It's like that Stevie Nicks song. You'll never get away.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I would love to know, like, as we kind of wrap things up and people are reflecting on their year and then planning 2025, travel always comes into play. Like, where do I want a vacation this year? Where do I want to spend time? I look at two things for me. I listen to like where my soul needs to go because I get activated a lot by land, but I also have a lot of past lives I need to heal. So that often directs me to where I'm going for travel.
Mhm.
But I love looking at astrocartography and seeing where I'm going to be supported to have a positive experience. I know you
Yeah.
do astrocartography, not all astrologers do. For those that aren't aware and haven't heard that term, can you explain what astrocartography is?
Yeah, astrocartography is one technique under the branch of locational astrology that helps us see how our natal charts are activated in different places separate from where we were born. And so one question I always get is this the same for everyone? Like, is Paris a certain energy or is Sydney a certain energy for everyone? And it's absolutely not. So if you've ever wondered why you love Paris and someone else doesn't, it probably has to do with how your birth chart manifests over the map. And so astrocartography gives us a map of the world with these beautiful colored lines, and these lines represent planets and where they are most visible and activated in different forms. So you can have lines that are related to your career or your love life or yourself or your family. Those are the four main areas. And then the planets provide a different flavor. So if you're like, I want to be a stay-at-home parent in this next chapter of my life, and I want to focus on family and nurturing, you might want to go to a moon IC, which is the fourth house, home and family line. Let's say I don't want to have kids. I want to go be a boss and I want to make $1 million and I want to hustle. So you might go to an MC line, which is career, that's Sun or Mars, one of those yang energies that helps you have a lot of output in that area. And so I always say, define your goals and figure out what it is that's important to you. See if you're
Yeah.
being called to a place, because your intuition, a lot of times, almost every single time, someone will say, I'm being really called to Ecuador. Bingo, Ecuador has a planetary line that's associated with the season of life you're in, the transits you're going through, and maybe it's temporary, but maybe you need to go there for 2 weeks and get it and then go back home. Maybe you need to go to a place for a year and experience it and then go find a new home. So it doesn't have to be temporary. You can experience it even in just a weekend. I always say you can experience it better if you give yourself a couple weeks to a month Most people can't do that. That's okay. But there's so many opportunities of places that can help you uncover new parts of yourself. Kind of like earlier when we were talking about transits and how that activates your potential over the
Yeah.
course of your life. I think astrocartography speeds it up.
So I know I'm being really called to Austria. Like it's
Wow.
screaming at me to go to Austria in the new year and to go into the mountains and to go to the Matterhorn and go to certain towns. I know, like when I look at the map, certain towns are screaming at me to visit. So for me, I also know I'm working on, the timing has been that I'm also working on healing that past life and some relationships from that
Mm,
past life. But now I want to look at my chart and see what lines are running near Austria
yeah.
and Vienna and
Hmm.
Salzburg and
Yeah.
Vermont to see what other energies are playing there. How can I do that? Do I need to have a astrologer look at the chart, or is there a website that I can go to?
There is a website. The astro.com is a free resource created by Liz Green. She's great. I will say this is the high level. This is like the free version, you know? So a lot of times people will take it very literally. They'll say, oh, wow, I need to go to a Venus line because Venus represents relationships to find love. There's other lines that are actually more conducive for love. And let's say if you have a challenged Venus in your chart, you might not even want to go there for that purpose. It could be harder. So that's where a professional comes in
Yeah.
and kind of debunks some of those things. But if you want to get started and just poke around and be like, whoa, what is this? Go to astro.com. It's called Astro Click Travel. If you want to just Google Astro Click Travel, it'll come up a lot easier than poking around. And it's a great resource. And like for you, for example, going to Vienna, you already know that you want to go there. You know it's important. But when you pull up the map and you see the lines that are there, you'll say, okay, this is what my soul needs to tap into, wake up, and activate right now. And even if it's a line that maybe that planet has a reputation, like Pluto or Saturn, you should still go because there's something within you that needs the dose of these lines, the energy that they provide.
Yeah, that's what I think is so neat is I find that when you listen, everything else ends up synchronizing. Or if you were to get an astrology reading for your year ahead or an astrocartography reading, I find that the things that they share with you, you were already starting to feel and it wasn't making sense. It helps everything line up. And again, it's just like a supportive map,
Yeah.
just to make the ride a little lighter, a little softer, a little easier.
It's so validating. Like, that's how I got into it because I was like, why was my life so difficult and different from the bell curve from 0 to 20 years old? Even though I'd moved to different places along the same line and it was still difficult. And I was like, oh, I thought if I just moved out of my hometown, it would be easier. It didn't get easier until I moved from North Carolina to Dallas and then to Dallas to Portland and the West Coast because I needed to get away from those lines because I was on a Saturn IC and in my chart it's a difficult line for most people, but that one's really hard in my chart based on the energies around it. And so it was so validating to just be like, oh wow, it wasn't in my head. It was difficult on paper. And there's better places for me out west. And it's been so much better on the West Coast.
I wish actually more parents use astrocartography to help their kids find where to go to college or where to
Yes,
move in their early 20s. I think
absolutely.
it would just make that life transition just so much more supportive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I work with a lot of parents when they're about to move. And one thing I always say is ethically, I have to look at your kids because I'm not going to sign off on a place that might be good for you and your partner, but could be really difficult for your kids in school because I've been through it and I'm not going to be a part of that. And so that's like a
Yeah.
disclaimer. I'm like, if you don't want me to look at your kid's chart, I can't do this for you.
That's beautiful. Good for you. And I feel ya. Starting a new school is not easy no matter your
Yeah.
age. So if you can have the energy supporting you, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. And usually I mean, I've never had anyone say, no, don't. They're usually like, oh, yeah, please, like, help me. Like, I want to help my kid. I want to know my kid. And I think that's such an act of love.
Yeah, well, you are currently living down in Mexico. So I would love for you to share how you decided and used what you know about astrology to choose your current home.
I'm in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, which is on the east coast of Mexico. And I'm on a sun zenith line. So when you look at the map, you won't see this on the map, but when you click extra details, you will see that this is an area where the sun line is very strong. And I felt it. I actually lived here in the same house that I'm staying in 4 or 5 years ago. And this was when my business started. And so it's been really cool for me. I kind of wanted to, in this 5th year of my business being full time, come back and see how much has grown in me as a person and in the business. This is where I met some of my most amazing business colleagues and friends, and life really, really changed here. So it's been cool to see that contrast. And I didn't feel called to come back here until now. I was like, I don't want to go back there. And I think now it's like the evaluation of the sun, of myself, and the things that I've created. That's the purpose here now. And then the rest of my journey, I'm going to go visit as many lines as I can that I haven't lived on and experienced. So I was thinking, I haven't lived on a Uranus line. And so that's one that most people don't usually feel called to. It usually kind of creates some chaos. That I am having a Uranus transit next year. So I'm like, I want to get to know Uranus a little better. So I'm like, I want to go to a Uranus line, and I want to go to I've watched my partner live on a Neptune line, but I've never lived on a Neptune line, which can enhance spirituality. And so I just want to go experience a couple of these places that I haven't in the long term. So that's my goal with this nomadic journey over the next year, is to kind of just live the experiment of this work. Because truthfully, locational astrology is a little bit of an experiment. It's really only been around since the 70s because people didn't travel before that in the same way that we do now.
Yeah, you're living my dream. I first did astrocartography, I want to say in like 2018, 2019. And my dream is just to be able to spend a year traveling and spending long times in certain locations and just seeing how good I can feel, how things can evolve, like all the magic that can flow into your life.
Yeah.
So, keep us posted.
Yeah, I will. I've been sharing a lot about my journey on Instagram. I plan to do even more kind of like documented. And I
Yeah.
realize it's super privileged. Like most people don't get the chance to do this, but I'm honestly looking at it as like if I was a research scientist, to get the information that I need to forward this field, I have to go live it and experience it, even if it also means that I have to live in some challenging lines. And it just worked out that, well, I won't say it worked out. I worked really hard in my early life to create remote work. That was my main goal. As a Gemini Sagittarius, I was like, I can't be tied to one place. And I remember in 2016 telling my mom, I was like, I'm going to work online and I'm not going to be tied to one place. And she was like, I hope so, honey. Good luck. And I was like, watch me.
Yeah. I
And that
love
was the goal. I was like, I need to be able to work from a laptop anywhere. And then it turned out to be able to do this.
Yeah, congratulations, because it's not an
Thank
easy
you.
business to create, one that
Yeah.
allows you to work remotely. So, really impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I realize that. It has been difficult. It's been a lot of grind. It takes a lot of dedication. I always tell people, and you probably know this too, like if you're
Yeah.
going to be an entrepreneur, you have to be obsessed with what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. And really feel like you have a calling.
Yeah.
And I have to use the spiritual work to keep me going. I have
Hmm.
to have my yearly, astrological chart looked at. I have to have my spiritual practitioners that I turn to when I'm down, to remind me of, why I started, why I have that spark, what I'm really leaning towards.
Yeah.
And then when you're reminded, you're like, I can't stop. Like,
Yeah.
I can never go back and work for someone else. Like, this is it. So,
Definitely not. Yeah. And I find too, like if I get away from my little bits of spiritual practice, I don't do my job to the quality that I want to. It's like this is kind of like part of the lifestyle of like living by the seasons and the astrology and the moon cycles and staying in tune with that and like checking in with my body and my energy and just being a sensitive person who's recovered from chronic illness too. It's just a different level of awareness and maintenance, and you have to be dedicated.
yeah, sometimes I wonder that everyone who is some sort of spiritual health wellness practitioner, that we all had this wave of chronic illness, this wave of
Yeah.
chronic fatigue, in order to stop us in our tracks and make us completely turn into our true life path. It's almost like we were all given the same style to force us to pivot.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. I was 17, I got a lupus diagnosis. I was bedridden and I was on a track to do film, television, design, and it was not working. And I started sleeping 16 hours a day and I was having all these awful symptoms and skin rashes and joint pain and my blood work was off the charts. it pivoted me towards health science. That's what I went into first. And then I was doing spiritual stuff on the side, and the spiritual stuff integrated with the allopathic route. I'm really big on integrative medicine, like bringing the two together helped heal that. And then I got it in remission. And a big kicker in getting it in remission was healing the people-pleasing wound. Because they say lupus is related to suppressing your own needs so much that it's almost like your immune system shuts down in response to that, and you live in accordance to what you think the world expects of you. And when I stopped doing that, my blood work reversed, and my rheumatologist was like, I've never seen that. I was like, it's real, right? She's like, yeah, it's real. And it stayed that way, and I haven't been sick since 2017. It's all connected. Mind, body, spirit, it's all connected. And I think you're right. It puts us on the path.
Yeah. And every time, just a reminder to everyone that's listening, anytime you have anything come up with your health, obviously look at your lifestyle, your mindset, try to find the root cause, and always look at the emotional root cause.
Yeah.
Because that played a role, whether you believe it or not. And that's actually the first thing I look to, because I know if I can identify that right away, all the other stuff, it's easy to follow and get it to clear up.
Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be something that we get out of the age of Aquarius, being the water bearer, where it's like the bridge of science and emotion, human intellect and emotion. I think that we will start to actually have work that backs it up in the masses, that our bodies, our emotions, and our spirits and health are all interconnected. We kind of already have some of that, the body keeps the score, those things, but I think it will become more obvious and more mainstream instead of like mental health, physical health. It's like, no, it's all health.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. Well, where can people connect with you, follow you, book a session with you?
To book a session and learn all the things, go to kjatlas.com. To follow with my travel journey, kj.atlas on Instagram. That's where I'm at most of the time. I experiment with TikTok and all those things, but Instagram is dominant. That's where I spend a lot of time. So find me there. And if you have questions, I always say, email my business manager, info@kjatlas.com.
Perfect. And could you leave our audience with one last spiritual or astrology or health tip that they consider adding into their life?
Don't forget to look up.
Oh, I love that.
You can look at all the charts and the apps, but as often as you can, try to go outside and actually see the moon or the star. I've been loving this season. You can see Jupiter so bright here. In Central and in North America, you can see Jupiter really bright right now. So go out and try to see Jupiter. One of my favorite apps for that is actually Skyview.
Okay.
And you can download it on your phone, and then you can shine it up to the sky, and it will show you what you're looking at. So if you're like, I think that might be a planet, and then you can show it up and you can see it, you can prove to yourself that you can see it. So yeah, look up, get out of your head. And people say go touch grass. Like, yeah, go touch grass and also look up at the sky.
I love that. Yeah. Go outside at night, bundle up, and enjoy the stars.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, KJ. I'm so glad that we've connected.
Me too. Thank you so much, Whitney.